Fourth and long, welcome back to episode 2 of the Fantasy Football Podcast for the 2020 COVID special. What a week 2 was. I cannot believe it. Not only did I lose, but everybody lost, and we're going to get into that right away. But first, Randy, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. Well, obviously, like you said, we got a lot to talk about. So, yeah, we won't waste too much time. Let's get to it.
Sounds good. What do you got for us today?
Well, we're gonna do. Well, first, we're gonna talk about the thing that everybody's talking about. We're talking about all these injuries and these big injuries, and the little thing I noticed about uh, certain positions are getting injured more than others. I'm sure everyone noticed that, but we're gonna get into some trades because with injuries means everybody. Despite what we said last week with the podcast, where don't do too many trades and start panicking. Well, you get a few injuries and you're going to have trades. So we got trades to talk about, and then if there's time at the end, I'm sure there will be. We'll talk about some just some general philosophical topics about ranking slaves and projection whores and guys and matchup guys. Yeah, so we'll talk about a lot of this stuff. But like I said, without getting too far into it, let's start with the injury report, which is a mile long, it seems. Let's talk about the big names first. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey is the big name there. He is Mr. Everything. He's Mr. Surefire, pretty much ranked number one on every pre-draft list, and didn't have any injury troubles in his history really. But now he's hurt, and he's done for a long time. So this kind of ruins an entire team's offense, that being Carolina. And not only that, pretty much anyone who's built their team around this guy is going to have to find something else. So, what's your opinion on
Well, yeah, no.
the general impact of his loss?
Well, obviously, I mean, if you're a fantasy owner, whether you do dynasty leagues or fresh out the gate every year, we all know this kid is going in your top two. I don't care what league you're in. This is a major loss to anybody. Texas Walker obviously has Christian McCaffrey as a keeper for the past couple of years. Looks like we're expecting a timeline of 4 to 6 weeks. Um, and of course, I think Mike Davis was grabbed off the waiver wire. So obviously, guys are listening to how important waivers are. But I think it's a huge loss, obviously. I mean, the guy averages probably 20 points, 20 fantasy points a game. That's a huge loss for any team. I mean, you can't make that up in other areas unless your quarterback kind of doubles their projection. Would probably be the closest spot I would think you could maybe make that up for. But just looking at Texas Walker's team here, I mean, really though, for a guy who lost somebody of that caliber, has done quite well. He's got Jonathan Taylor, Josh Kelly for the Chargers, who looks like he's going to be explosive here, and of course J.K. Dobbins from Baltimore. So realistically, that big of a loss doesn't hurt Cody that much. However, fantasy-wise, Randy, I'll flip it back to you or anybody who's listening. I'd be curious to see if they get Teddy Bridgewater moving more. Are they going to get him airborne because you're not so dependent on the ground game? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's kind of my thinking. The potential is that particularly because McCaffrey is so big in the passing game. Well, like who is
True,
Teddy going to
true.
pass to now?
Yeah.
Right? Someone who is that good at catching the ball and running in open space is not easy to replace. So you got to think Robbie Anderson might be looking at a few more touches because he looks like he's got a bit more of a rapport. He had a good week too there.
Oh, for sure, and you got guys like DJ Moore. Maybe their value goes up. Maybe they become a bit more dependent, like you're saying, right? So it would be very curious to see how they adjust with life. Obviously, if you're a Panther fan or Cody in general, you didn't lose him for the year. So if you can hang on for about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on how bad that injury really was, I'm sure he'll bounce back right when you kind of need him, right in that heat of the moment before the trade deadline, or when things are heating up on who's claiming what roster playoff spots. Um, Moving down the list, I'll announce the name, and I want your feedback first. I'll try to hold back the tears. Saquon Barkley done for the year. Tough loss. Randy, where do the Giants and fantasy owners like myself, where do they turn to now?
Well, that's a tough one, like I said, because you're going to notice a theme. There's quite a few running backs that are on the shelf, and running backs aren't as uh, uh, they're not as common. At least not the big name ones aren't as common as they used to be. Where they used to be the best. You used to always have to draft a running back first. Now the wide receivers have taken over a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, like it's kind of the same thing, right? As McCaffrey, he runs the ball very well. He catches the ball very well. Even on a lackluster team, he does it very well. And fantasy wise, he's good for it no matter what. It's just the kind of thing that for most fantasy guys, if you have a stud running back, you definitely rely on that. You tend to draft players from different positions before they run out because you know you're already solid at the running back position. Now you lose that one sure thing, no matter who it is, and now you're kind of lost. You're kind of scrambling, looking for running backs of all kinds. You're looking for starters somewhere. You're looking for trades. You're anything you can get to try to get that running game back. What it ends up coming out to, at least for fantasy wise, is now, and you kind of mentioned it with Cody's team, is that you kind of have to do what I like to call in my projections a well-rounded win. Now you can't just have one guy spouting off for 25, 30 points as a running back, and then kind of rely on the rest of the guys to chip in. Now everybody needs to chip in. As far as with the Giants go, well, as you know, their whole offense relied around him, and when it's a running back that can pound the ground and can be relied on in all downs and in all four quarters of the game, it also plays a toll on the defense because now if there's too many 3 and outs, the defense gets tired by the third quarter, and now it's trouble all around. So it's definitely not a great injury. Obviously, done for the season is obviously the last thing you want to hear. Basically, at least from your point of view, you'll be following his progress on his injury, and depending on how bad it is, you may. Now, I don't think this is likely because he got hurt so early in the season. He's got lots of time to recover, but you may even be considering, should I even keep him if he's not good for the start of next year?
Well, the thought has definitely crossed my mind. It's something to consider to see how the year goes, on where we're going to move with that. But yeah, devastating blow. Going to be tough to recover from that one for sure. But like you say, it's not as easy in the past. Not to mention, we just talked about 2 running backs. There's a couple more we'll kind of briefly touch on here. But like you mentioned, the running back train, I think guys and fantasy owners alike are realizing that they are a high commodity and they're tough to come by. And if you can stock up on them, you've created a bait like no other this year, really, to increase your trade value options. But quickly here, with the Giants, I noticed both of their running backs were picked up on the waivers this week, Dion Lewis and Devontae Freeman. I'm very curious to watch Devontae Freeman to see how he does. I know he has some COVID quarantine stuff going on here, but, if you remember Freeman from the day old, really a stellar running back in Atlanta. Hopefully, maybe a spark of life for that run game in New York, but I know Walter Sobchak, Brett there, he picked Freeman up, so it'll be interesting to see what he does with him moving forward for the Giants. Speaking of running backs here, just a couple more. Raheem Mostert, he's got a knee injury. Not to mention, we can just talk about the 49ers here. What a rough weekend they had. Raheem Mostert, knee injury, gone. Nick Bosa, torn ACL, gone. Solomon Thomas, torn ACL, gone. Garoppolo, high ankle sprain, gone. How do they recoup as an entire there's a lot of fantasy options in that team, especially the defense losing 2, so that makes fantasy value. Let's just talk about the defense there. What does that do for San Francisco's defensive stat line?
Well, it makes it just that much tougher. I mean, for one thing, there's going to be fewer sacks because you got a good pass rusher who's out. But good pass rushers also tend to lead to interceptions, turnovers. Obviously, if you're turning the ball over and get sacks, it's harder to put points on the board, especially late in games when you might have to air it out a bit more. You might have to sit in the pocket. Maybe the offensive line is a little tired and you can get around the guy. So, all around a good pass rush, if it get even if it gets pressure and gets home, can really mess with a quarterback. Now, of course, there's always Hall of Fame level quarterbacks that can work their way around that and use short passes and strategize around it. You know, maybe put a linebacker or sorry, a tight end on them too. There's lots of things that they can do, but yeah. Whenever you have a pass rusher like Bosa, so good at well, either of the Bosa brothers to be honest, when you lose one of them, you lose a real big weapon, and suddenly it's kind of like with the running backs. Everybody has to start chipping in because a big part of your defense is gone.
Yeah, no, for sure. And they got a decent matchup this week against the Giants, but interesting, they're still up in the MetLife where some of these injuries were reported to happen. And San Francisco actually asked the league to investigate the field.
Yeah,
Report came back that the field met all criteria. But
yeah.
just tough for that team to lose that many weapons. And going back to the offensive side now, Raheem Mostert, with that knee injury, really has opened the door for Jerick McKinnon to get another crack at it. And I'm very curious to see what he does there, because I think that used to be what we would call a committee. But with Matt Breida going to the Dolphins, it really only left the door for those two with one hurt. I think McKinnon's going to have a field day against the Giants.
Well, he's going to get all the touches because I'm looking here. Tevin Coleman is on injured reserve too. So yeah, they started the year with what, three or four running backs. Now they're just down to McKinnon. He's the only one left basically of that committee. So it's not a committee anymore. So suddenly he's worth picking up.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, tough go for San Francisco. Definitely. Let's continue on. Any other injuries that are going to cause some fantasy issues coming up?
Well, we can get into some of the wide receivers. One, Michael Thomas. A lot has been said about that. I know we mentioned it last week on the podcast, but same old story. High ankle sprain. He's out for a couple of weeks at least. I think Kamara's going to get the high workload. We noticed on Monday night there. Emmanuel Sanders actually got uh, fewer looks, even not just fewer catches, but fewer attempts thrown his way. So that's a real head scratcher. So now you got to wonder, is that going to start affecting Breeze's fantasy numbers? Because if he's not looking to, like, who's he going to pass to other than just Kamara? So basically now Kamara runs the whole offense. So that's a tough one. I don't know if you want to talk about that one for a minute too before we move on.
Yeah, I just think it's unfortunate for the Saints, especially Devil Raiders. I mean, I'm playing him, but still, regardless, we got to talk what we got to talk about. But Michael Thomas there, he had a really good matchup this week too if he could play, because Green Bay's given up the fifth most fantasy points to wide receivers, and obviously we know what type of weapon Thomas is. So to lose that, I mean, if you're Corey or the Bears, you're laughing, because Kamara is going to do what he did on Monday night, like you mentioned. Tough for Michael Thomas, but again, he had that high ankle sprain, right? And people have to remember he's only had 2 weeks off, so missing this week, of course. So he's going to be out for a while. It just seems to be that there's a lot of ankles and ACLs. Just a quick note:
Yeah.
seven ACLs were torn last weekend. Seven. So that number is definitely unfortunate. Then you got guys like Julio Jones. I believe he's battling with a hamstring injury. But surprisingly enough, Calvin Ridley has taken over, right? And I mean, they still have those weapons. So if you did it right and you drafted kind of that wideout two on a team with weapons, when the number one goes down, you might think, oh, sweet, Calvin Ridley or Emmanuel Sanders, they're going to get all the touches. Well, remember what happened when we had Antonio Brown and Juju. When you have that elite wide receiver taking all the double teams or getting the safeties to cut across, of course they're going to go to the lesser wide receiver. But when you don't have that decoy out there anymore and you're the number one guy, Calvin Ridley, Emmanuel Sanders, their numbers are going to go down because they'll just double team the only option left.
Right.
So
Right. And that's where a guy like Gage will he'll get more looks because he'll be taking Ridley's spot as the second guy who might not get the best matchup, like you said.
well, and that's where I think a lot of people think like injuries are never good, obviously, but you're thinking, okay, well, that guy got out, so now my guy gets all the touches, but not necessarily. I think that's a different category when you're maybe in a two running back system as opposed to a two wide receiver system, because defenses can just shut down the pass game and they'll force you to run. So yeah, a few injuries. George
And
Kitt.
actually, before you move on, speaking of hammies, Devonte Adams also has a hamstring injury. He has practiced in a limited fashion. Still not sure, at least from what I could see, not sure if he'll play or not. If he doesn't, then Aaron Jones obviously gets a big bump. Obviously, Aaron Jones runs the whole offense in Green Bay, anyways. But uh, Rogers' numbers could go down as well, just because, well, why go away from Aaron Jones? And if there's no Devonte Adams, well, then that's your only option. So that's just something I thought I'd mention. That's another hammy that is bothering a wide receiver.
Yeah, and just one more report I see here, and then we'll quit talking injuries. We'll move on to something else. But the last one I saw, remember we talked the other week about waiver wire acquisitions, and we thought, oh, Sammy Watkins came up. I remember we talked about him. He took a helmet to helmet, and they're actually thinking his concussion protocol might prevent him from playing Monday night against Baltimore. So, again, not the top weapon on that team, but another weapon that could be that what I just talked about could be that decoy, could be the decoy option from Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelsey, and now you've lost that. So look for guys from Robinson, Herdman, and maybe Clyde gets more catches out of the backfield with Watkins potentially not playing. So tons of injuries. I mean, there's been a million more. We figured these were the most important ones to discuss here because they bring a lot of trade value and interesting discussions. If you guys have picked up on other injuries that you think are worth talking about, please comment when we post the podcast, and we'd love to have further discussion with you guys. But we can't talk about injuries forever. We can talk. We can, yeah, especially the one that affects me the most. But there's definitely some. Randy brought up the point with injuries come trades, and my goodness, it's good to see everybody getting active again with the trade value. I'm sure for every one that's been approved, there's probably 50 that have been declined. But let's go back in time and let's just catch everybody up on a few of the trades, shall we?
Sure, yeah. Which one do you want to start with? Well, I guess you know what. Why don't I start? Why don't I go ahead and talk about me first, and then kind of get me out of the way. We'll talk about the rest of them.
Sounds good.
So yeah, I was involved in a trade, sending Stefan Diggs to the Connor role, and in return I got Hunter Henry, and I got your boy Slayton there from the Giants.
Mm-hmm.
This was just kind of this kind of situation where I thought Hooper would end up doing better. He hasn't really done well the first 2 weeks, so I needed a bit better option at tight end. I happen to have a wealth of wide receivers, especially since CeeDee Lamb seems to be picking up the playbook very quickly. So I offered up a good starting wide receiver on my team, Stefan Diggs, and then I ended up getting a good return for mine. So I think I think we both did very well here because I know Connor got an upgraded wide receiver from whom he sent me, and I got the tight end that I wanted. So I think everyone was happy with this one.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a decent trade. I mean, too bad about Austin Hooper. I think a lot of expectations coming out of Atlanta, coming over to Cleveland. You're thinking maybe even if Njoku wasn't the guy, Hooper should have been the guy. But obviously, they've established themselves as a run offense, which bodes well for myself, Kareem Hunt. But definitely, Hunter Henry seems to be that tight end that I know last year, obviously, Philip Rivers loved him. And you're right, he is an upgrade from a position you needed. You really weren't starving at wide receiver, but I'll tell you, man, you might not think a lot of him. And Darius Slayton, he's like he's like a Cole Beasley, Julian Edelman. He just picks up yardage and magically gets touchdowns or long stretch plays. So you're not going to be disappointed by grabbing Slayton involved in that trade. I think that was good. And then you look at the Connor role, grabbing Stephon Diggs. I know he's got a wealth of running backs, so I think Diggs has performed well with Allen. I think we talked about that in the offseason, that would be an improvement. So, all in all, I think that was a pretty decent trade. The next trade, though, however, caused a couple issues with with an IR spot. But man, there was a lot of players involved here. So Kelly Devil Raiders acquired Matt Ryan, wide receiver Paris Campbell, who's now on the IR, and DeAndre Swift, running back for the Lions. And he traded Chase Edmonds and T.Y. Hilton to global warming. This one was kind of an interesting trade because I asked Ryan, why did you go after Edmonds? You have Kenyon Drake. You're taking up potentially two roster spots to be on one running game. Like you had DeAndre Swift, but he seems to think it was a pretty decent trade. I know he's not too happy with T.Y. Hilton not really getting involved. So Ryan's definitely built up running back depth. I think now he could probably piece one of those or one of his quarterbacks, and potentially look for maybe an upgrade in the wide receiver position. As for Kelly, I guess he went after Matt Ryan. Looking at that option, obviously lost a wide receiver to the IR, Paris Campbell, but that didn't hurt him too bad. And then, of course, picking up that depth running back in DeAndre Swift, kind of competing there in Detroit with Adrian Peterson. Pretty decent trade overall. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, Ryan was the big. Matt Ryan was the big piece in that trade, and
Mm-hmm.
and I do think it makes a lot of sense. Ryan has done trades in order to flip that player for someone else. He's done that in the past. So sometimes it doesn't make sense. Like, why would you pick up this guy? But if he thinks he can flip him somewhere else, he's done that before. So I wouldn't put it past him for this one. But yeah, Matt Ryan was the big get there for Devil Raiders. Even if he doesn't start him over Breeze, really, he can keep an eye on Drew Brees and see if he's starting to lose his touch. I know it. I know it sounds like blasphemy to talk that way about Drew Brees, but especially with Michael Thomas gone for a few more weeks, like you said before, you might not be able to trust him. And even though Matt Ryan's probably not going to win a lot of games, they're going to be all kinds of fourth quarter, airing the ball out because that defense can't stop anything. So yeah, that's one of the things where Matt Ryan will will be a very consistent and very good fantasy option at quarterback. So he's got two great options there. So he's sitting pretty at the quarterback position.
Yeah, for sure. And like you say, it's a matter of sometimes to everybody else it might question as to who, what, or why, but every owner has their reasons, and you might be able to flip a couple things. So they'll both those teams, like you mentioned, have guys they could potentially flip.
Yeah,
Speaking of guys that were flipped, going back further down the timeline, we had a trade between the Connor Roll and Clueless. Darius Slayton was traded to the Connor Roll, and Ronald Jones II was traded to Clueless. Um, Interestingly enough, it hasn't been officially done yet, but I traded James White for Ronald Jones II between me and Clueless, so both Slayton and Jones are now on other teams. So looking at the time, I think this was kind of just options to move pieces to maybe gain that depth really early in the season, not knowing where your roster might lie. That's kind of how I read this trade.
yeah, yeah. Me too. This was just a depth. Yeah, exactly. This was just trying to get a bit more depth at a different position. Uh, since none of them were real big keepers, they're both sitting on the bench. They're both primed to be tossed somewhere else, and that's what both of them did. So yeah, that's how I see it as well.
And the last one, or quote, the very first one, was between Clueless and Conneroll. So congratulations, Conneroll. You've been involved in almost every trade out there this year. But Clueless acquired Marlon Mack and a sixth-round pick for Kerryon Johnson and a fifth-round pick. We didn't talk about him earlier, but we all know Marlon Mack went down week one with the, I believe, MCL injury, ACL, MCL. But regardless, done for the year. So tough goal for Clueless there to do that. But I know he's been involved in a couple more that are still pending to move a couple pieces around. So
Yeah, yeah. I think Clueless. I think Alan heard you talking about about Connor will being in every trade. And I think Alan wants to break that record because he's got two more on the docket possibly. So
Yeah, no, for sure. So, yeah, no, I mean, we're just starting week three, as you guys know. Thursday night's tonight. That's when we're recording it. So, lots of trades already, and we're only just starting week three. So, very exciting to see the trades continue down, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more with the injuries, the bye weeks, etc. So, and we'll keep you guys up to date on that. Moving down to what will probably be our last conversation here for the episode. As you all know, there's different ways to play fantasy, and sometimes they come with a title that maybe you like or you don't like, and we're going to ask you guys to identify where you fall in. So we kind of have a ranking slave where you look at it and go, okay, where do they fall, quote, one to however many players are in the league each week? Where do they, if I was to draft right now, where would they fall up? And when I look at that research, do I base my starting lineups on that? Do I base my trades on that? So we call that a ranking slave. Then, of course, you have your matchup horrors. Who's going to do better? Well, of course, they're playing that green. We all see the colors, right? Oh, the green means money, the red means, oh, I better look elsewhere. And then, of course, you have your projection slots. Are you just tied to a number and you just cannot focus off that number? So, Randy, where do you fall in that category, or are you a hybrid?
well, I'm a little bit of a hybrid, but I will say if I had to pick just one, I am a bit more of a projection slut. Uh, I like to look at those numbers. I don't know exactly where those numbers come from. Sometimes they're head scratchers, but I got to figure Yahoo Sports is doing some sort of research. They're not just pulling numbers out of their ass. I'm sure. I mean, if they were, I wouldn't be able to tell. But for the most part, at least with these projections, uh, they mostly make sense. Like you can kind of look at some matchups and you can look at recent history and and some injuries and stuff, and you can kind of figure why it's five more points this week than last week, and so on. And you can kind of make that adjustment. Um, I'm not such a projection slut that I will change my lineup to gain a half a point advantage in the projection. Mostly, it's just kind of used to kind of mostly just to see the big differences. The minute differences, I tend to go with my gut a little more. I tend to be, and part of that gut is a little bit of the matchup more. So I will check out matchups. However, I don't look at rankings, at least not past draft time. Obviously, every draft list you have, whether it's on the Yahoo website or whether it's I went and bought a fantasy magazine this year and for the live draft, and obviously every player has numbers on there. So that's the only time I use any kind of ranking. So you can disqualify me from that one almost totally, especially once the season starts. But I'm mostly a projection slut with a little bit mixture of a matchup holder.
Well, sounds like a good Friday night. But no, I definitely, if I had to categorize myself too, it would be in the projection slot category. Those numbers, there's just something about them because obviously you need more numbers than the other guy to win. It's just simple math. So when I look at my projections and I'm projected to do well, maybe I don't tweak them that much. If I'm projected to be behind a little bit and I got a guy on a bench, I might just go, hey, if I plug that number in, oh, look at that. All of a sudden, I'm sitting higher than my opponent. I can live with that because that's where I should end up. But then you got to come into the matchups, and then it doesn't always work out as the projections are projections for a reason, right? If they're solidified numbers, nobody would play. So to look at that, it's definitely tempting to just chuck those numbers and get that higher number. Rankings, though, I might be a hybrid of all three here, and the reason I say that is there's a lot of times that I'll look at, say, the Score app, and they have their fantasy rankings, and I look at it and I go, okay, I got two guys who I'm not really sure. Where do these experts rank him? Where do they put him? Oh, he's the number 15th running back, and my other guy's the 54th. Okay, well that makes sense. I'll put the other guy in, and it doesn't always pan out either. But it's almost like where else do you do your research? You can't, or do you, it's obviously blind luck, but there's little tools out there that try to tempt you in and definitely try to buy you into their methodology for sure. But also, a lot of this is being done with last seconds to spare before Sunday at noon. But projection numbers, man, that's definitely a selling point for sure. And I know it's probably burnt me before. Obviously, tonight, Jordan Howard was projected for 4 points. So I took him out of the game. I just couldn't live with that number, and he's already got a touchdown, which has put him over 4 points. So it doesn't always work out. So just be careful of what you categorize yourself in. But just a few categories we wanted to bring forward on on what some guys might be labeled as, and definitely curious to see how you guys tweak your lineups. What methods do you use? Where do you fall in? So I'd be curious to see what the feedback is from the guys.
Yeah, and I also want to ask a question. This is kind of off the cuff, so you know, if you're not prepared for the answer, that's okay. But mostly just uh, and of course, if there's any trade secrets here, you don't have to give them away. But
Yeah,
uh,
for sure.
uh, when you see a projection that that kind of goes against what your initial thoughts of what it might be, particularly with a when you compare it to a ranking or a matchup, does that make you um, do a little more research into why did they like why is this projection so low? It looks like a good matchup. It look say it's a quarterback and
Mm-hmm.
you know he's projected 5 points lower than usual. You think, well, they're playing a pretty lousy defense. You know, is it at home? Is it gonna snow? Is there bad weather? Is there like a? Does it make you look into these things, or that's the main thing? Do you question the projections when it doesn't look right to you?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I've definitely been in that scenario that you're talking about, and I find a really I think the better example, which you did bring up, is the quarterback. If you do have two quarterbacks on your roster, sometimes, unless you have like that elite guy that you know you're just playing, you don't care what defense they're up, you just can't afford to not play them. But when you get away from that tier one echelon, and maybe you have a couple, their projections could be so weird, close, they could be far apart, but you're like, man, the last few games he's been riding high. Why are they got him? Why do they got him low? What's going on? And I think you've nailed it. It's like, are they on the road? Yeah, what time of day is it? Do they have to travel across the country? Is the weather bad? There's a lot you can put into that. But yeah, it's it's a very loaded question. I don't think there's any secrets. I think it's just my gut feeling based off of the numbers, and then I look and I say, who are they playing? And but you could have it the opposite. He could be, you could have a quarterback projected for more points than your other guy, and you look at it and you're like, yeah, but they're playing that defense in the last 4 weeks. That defense has just destroyed quarterbacks. Is it worth it? So there's a lot to it. It's a very good point you make off the cuff. Do you handle that any different than what I just mentioned?
Not really, no. Um, especially when it comes to well, quarterbacks especially, but even with defenses, I don't know how much thought you put into defenses. Most guys pick one defense, so I doubt they do much research because they're not benching any. But that's one avenue where I'm more of a matchup whore in that way, just because I'm looking for a lousy defense. I'm looking for, or sorry, a lousy offense for my defense to play against. That's what I'm mainly looking at. Obviously, there's the rankings and and the projections all look good and stuff like that. But I will completely ignore a ranking or sorry, I will completely ignore a projection for a defense if I think that there's something else going on there, like they don't have a good quarterback or the running back's injured. I won't even look into that. But then defenses is different because you never have three defenses on your bench, so it's not like you can switch them out that easily.
Yeah, no, for sure, and yeah, the defense is definitely a matchup. I think we all agree. I'd almost guarantee it if anybody chimed in here from the league when their defense is on the bye or their defense is going up against a really talented team, say Baltimore, Kansas City, Green Bay, for example. they will look to the waiver to be like, okay, who's playing the Jags this week? Who's playing the Dolphins, the Browns, Washington, even Giants? Who's oh, Detroit's defense is playing the Giants. I'll take them because that offense is not as powerful as the one my number one pick defense should play. So that's a
Right.
that's exactly scenarios that I'm sure we all follow and do. And but yeah, just different categories, just different worlds, just different waves on how everybody sets their lineup. Maybe guys do a lap around their house, flip a coin, stinker tinker time. Obviously, some work better than other. I mean, we got two guys who are 0 and 2, and we got two guys who are 2 and 0. So obviously, guys are doing something right. Everybody's doing something different. So this week we'll see what comes out. I'm gonna go look at projections right now, actually, after the podcast, just to see if I got everything going for the weekend. But that kind of concludes a bunch of our topics here. Anything else you want to add for this episode? Any big news or anything like that?
Well, just so that just something about just something one more about being a projection slot. Just as most guys know, they read the rankings. I talk about the projections a lot, especially when I compare them to what they ended up doing. So obviously, guys can probably guess that side of it. But yeah, yeah. Just like expect the rankings to get a little more precise as we go on. I know just about everybody moved positions last week, but obviously week two, most of the league is 1-1, so it's pretty hard to gauge rankings. But as the year goes along, get a little more accurate. There should be less movement, but then again, who knows? I've done these rankings a couple of years now, and man, I thought I've seen it all, but I've seen guys go from first to worst and worst to first all the time. So it just happens.
No, yeah, and those are always a fun read. Rankings in their own in their own mind. I know people can get pretty pumped or pretty upset about those, and maybe those people will side more with the rankings slave. But definitely looking forward to week three here. Good luck, everybody. Hopefully, if you don't have a win, you get one. If you're winning, hopefully you do. And best of luck to everybody. Knock on wood. Hopefully, no more injuries. I think we've had enough for this year.
Yeah, exactly. Especially the quarterbacks. Keep them safe. We don't need any quarterbacks hurt here.
All right, boys. Good luck, and we'll talk to you next week. Take care.
See you guys.